The tension in the CNN debate room was palpable. Under the brilliant studio lights, two of America's most contentious political figures sat facing one another, prepared for what would become the most surprising political confrontation of 2025. Karoline Leavitt, the 27-year-old former White House press aide turned congressional candidate, sat confidently in her classic navy blazer, her blonde hair perfectly styled, and her eyes sharp with the sort of ambition that had made her Trump's youngest spokesperson. Across from her, Kash Patel, the 45-year-old former FBI director nominee and son of Indian immigrants, adjusted his necktie with the calm exactness of a man who had spent many years in the intelligence community. What happened in the next half-minute would send reverberations across America and alter both of their political careers for good. "Or Mr. Patel," Leavitt began, her voice carrying that familiar edge that had made her known during White House briefings. "Perhaps it's time you stopped pretending to grasp American values and went back to India where you belong." The words lingered in the air like a bomb about to detonate. The studio audience let out a collective gasp. CNN anchor Anderson Cooper's eyes widened in disbelief. Social media would later label it the most bigoted comment ever uttered on live television by a significant political figure. But Kash Patel's response was something nobody saw coming. What he said next didn't just ruin Leavitt's political career, it revealed a truth about America that left the whole nation speechless. Before we get into this incredible story, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of the explosive political happenings we cover. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. This was not just another political debate. This was the moment when America's difficult truths collided with its highest ideals live on national television. And by the end of this standoff, one career would be over, one would be changed, and the entire country would be discussing what it truly means to be an American. To grasp how we reached this explosive moment, you need to know who these two people truly are, and why this discussion mattered so much to America's future. At just 27, Karoline Leavitt had already reached political heights that most people never achieve in their whole careers. Born and raised in New Hampshire, she came from a working-class Catholic family that taught her the value of hard work and conservative principles. After graduating from St. Anselm College, she secured a role in Trump's White House communications team when she was barely 24 years old. Leavitt quickly made a name for herself as one of Trump's most fervent defenders. Her youth, combined with her sharp tongue and unyielding loyalty, made her a media favorite among conservatives. When Trump needed someone who could handle hostile press conferences and never retreat from a fight, he chose Leavitt as the youngest White House press secretary in American history. But Leavitt's ascent was not without controversy. Critics referred to her as Trump's attack dog, citing her past of inflammatory remarks and her readiness to say whatever it took to protect her boss. Her supporters saw her as a fresh face, a young woman who wasn't afraid to confront the liberal media establishment. After leaving the White House, Leavitt set her sights on Congress, running for New Hampshire's 1st District on a platform of America First policies and traditional values. She positioned herself as the future of the conservative movement, the one who would carry Trump's torch into the next generation. Kash Patel's story was quintessentially American, even though Leavitt would attempt to use it against him. Born to parents who emigrated from India in the 1970s, Patel grew up in New York, watching his father work multiple jobs to provide for his family. His parents had arrived in America with nothing but aspirations and a work ethic that would make their son proud. Patel excelled in school, earning a law degree and eventually climbing the ranks through the Department of Justice. He served as a prosecutor pursuing terrorists and drug cartels, putting his life in danger for his adopted country. When Trump came to power, Patel became one of his most trusted advisors on national security matters. As a senior official in the Trump administration, Patel was known for his intellect, his loyalty, and his ability to get things done. He played key roles in counterterrorism operations and was crucial in revealing what Trump called the deep state conspiracy against his presidency. Trump trusted Patel so much that he nominated him to lead the FBI, though the nomination faced strong opposition from Democrats who saw him as too loyal to Trump. Unlike many politicians, Patel had actually put his life on the line for America. He had worked undercover operations, had been threatened by terrorists and had spent many years in the intelligence community safeguarding American lives. His record of service was flawless, but to some, his Indian heritage made him an easy target. This CNN debate wasn't just about two political careers. It was taking place at a critical point in American politics when questions about immigration, identity, and what it means to be truly American were dividing the country. Leavitt represented a segment of the conservative movement that felt America was losing its character. She spoke for millions of Americans who felt that their country was changing too rapidly, that traditional values were under attack, and that only people with deep American roots could truly understand what the country needed. Patel represented something different, the American dream in action. He was evidence that immigrants could become some of America's most devoted patriots. That love of country wasn't determined by how many generations your family had been here, but by your readiness to serve and sacrifice for American ideals. The CNN debate was meant to focus on national security policy, an area where both had expertise. Leavitt had been Trump's spokesperson during major global crises, while Patel had actually been in the room making life and death decisions about America's safety. But as the cameras rolled and the questions started, it became clear that this would be about much more than policy. This would be about the very soul of America. CNN had promoted it as the future of conservative politics, featuring two rising stars who represented different visions for where the Republican Party should go. The network expected fireworks, but nobody foresaw what was about to occur. The stage was set. Two ambitious politicians, each representing a different vision of America, sitting across from each other under the brightest lights in the country. One would walk away successful, the other would have their career destroyed by their own words. What happened next would force America to face some uncomfortable truths about itself. The debate began normally enough. Anderson Cooper, CNN's veteran anchor, started with questions about border security and national defense, safe ground for both candidates. For the first 20 minutes, Leavitt and Patel exchanged policy positions like seasoned professionals. Leavitt advocated for strict immigration controls and accused the Biden administration of weakening America's borders. "We need leaders who understand that America must come first," she said, her voice confident and clear. "Our citizens deserve to know that their government is working for them, not for people who have no right to be here." Patel responded with his typical measured tone, outlining specific policies while drawing on his experience in law enforcement. "I've spent my career actually catching the bad guys," he said calmly. "I've worked undercover to stop drug cartels and terrorists. I know the difference between real threats and political talking points." The first hint of trouble came when Cooper inquired about the Trump administration's immigration policies. Leavitt immediately went on the offensive, suggesting that some Trump officials had not been tough enough on immigration enforcement. "We need people in government who truly understand American values," Leavitt said, her eyes flicking toward Patel, "people whose loyalty to this country can never be questioned." Patel raised an eyebrow but kept his composure. "I think my record speaks for itself," he replied. "I've risked my life for this country more than once. I've put terrorists in prison and helped keep Americans safe. If that's not loyalty, I don't know what is." But Leavitt wasn't backing down. She had come to this debate with a plan, and she was determined to carry it out regardless of the results. "It's easy to claim loyalty," she shot back, "but real Americans don't need to prove their patriotism. It's in their blood." The phrase, "real Americans," lingered in the air like a warning. Cooper shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sensing that the debate was entering dangerous territory. In the control room, CNN producers began to worry about where this was headed. Patel's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "Miss Leavitt, I hope you're not implying that American citizenship is determined by ancestry rather than values and service." "I am implying," Leavitt replied, her voice growing sharper, "that some people understand America instinctively, while others have to learn it from books." The audience in the studio began to murmur. This was becoming personal, and everyone could feel it. On social media, viewers were already starting to take sides with hashtags like #TheyAreWireal Americans and #Immigrant Pride starting to trend. Cooper tried to steer the conversation back to policy, asking about specific border security measures, but Leavitt had tasted blood, and she wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. She had clearly decided that the best way to defeat Patel was to question his basic right to speak for America. Mr. Patel talks a good game about American values, she continued, but when push comes to shove, where do his loyalties truly lie? When he looks in the mirror, does he see an American or does he see something else? The studio fell silent. This was no longer a policy debate. This was a direct assault on Patel's identity and sense of belonging in America. Cooper looked stunned, clearly struggling with whether to intervene or let this play out. Patel's supporters watching at home felt their hearts sink. They had seen this before, the subtle and not so subtle suggestions that Americans with immigrant backgrounds could never be real Americans, no matter how much they accomplished or sacrificed. But Patel himself remained calm, almost eerily so. He looked directly at Leavitt with the kind of steady gaze that had intimidated terrorists in interrogation rooms. Leavitt, he said quietly, I think you should be very careful about the path you're choosing. Leavitt either didn't hear the warning in his voice or chose to disregard it. She had committed to this strategy, and she was going to see it through to the end. Mr. Patel, you've served in government, and I respect that. But there's a difference between serving America and truly understanding America. Some of us were born with that understanding. Others, she paused dramatically, others will always be trying to prove they belong. The insult was clear, even if the words were carefully chosen. Leavitt was suggesting that Patel, despite his years of service and sacrifice, could never be a real American because of his immigrant background. Patel nodded slowly as if he had been anticipating this moment all along. I see, he said calmly. So, you believe that American identity is determined by ancestry rather than actions. That's an interesting stance for someone who claims to support constitutional values. I believe, Leavitt replied, her voice rising, that America should be led by Americans who don't need to prove their loyalty, because it's never been in question. The audience was getting restless now. Some people were applauding Leavitt's boldness, while others were clearly uneasy with the direction of the conversation. Cooper was frantically receiving instructions through his earpiece, with CNN executives uncertain whether to cut to commercial or let this explosive moment continue. That's when Patel did something unexpected. Instead of becoming angry or defensive, he smiled. It was a calm, confident smile that suggested he knew something that nobody else in the room knew. Miss Leavitt, he said, his voice taking on a different tone. Since you want to talk about who really belongs in America, let me tell you a story. It's about my family and it's about yours. And by the time I'm done, I think everyone watching will understand exactly who deserves to question whose loyalty to this country. Leavitt's confidence wavered for just a moment. Something in Patel's tone suggested that he wasn't about to give up and absorb her attacks. In fact, it sounded like he had been preparing for this moment his entire career. You see, Patel continued, his voice growing stronger, I've spent years in the intelligence community. I know how to research people. I know how to find information. And before I came here tonight, I did a little research on you, Miss Leavitt. What I found was very, very interesting. The studio fell completely silent. Even the camera operators stopped moving. Everyone sensed that something big was about to happen. Leavitt's face had gone pale. She clearly hadn't expected Patel to fight back with information of his own. I don't know what you think you found, she said, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. Patel's smile widened. Oh, I think you know exactly what I found, but don't worry, I'm going to share it with everyone. And that's when Kash Patel dropped a bombshell that would change everything. Kash Patel leaned forward in his chair, his hands folded calmly in front of him. The studio lights seemed to concentrate on him as he prepared to deliver what would become one of the most devastating political comebacks in American history. Miss Leavitt, he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years briefing presidents and hunting terrorists. You just told me to go back to India. You suggested that I'm not a real American. You question my loyalty to this country. He paused, letting the weight of her words sink in with the audience. But before we talk about who belongs in America, let me share some facts with the American people, facts that I think they deserve to know. Leavitt shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The confidence she had shown just moments earlier was disappearing as she realized that Patel wasn't going to simply take her attack. "You see," Patel continued, "when you work in intelligence, you learn to verify everything. So, when I heard that I would be debating Karoline Leavitt tonight, I did what any good investigator would do. I checked the facts about both of our families." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. "This is public information available to anyone who cares to look, but I suspect most Americans don't know the real story of the Leavitt family history." The cameras zoomed in on the folder as Patel opened it deliberately. CNN producers were frantically trying to decide whether to intervene, but the ratings were skyrocketing as viewers across the country sensed they were witnessing something historic. "Let's start with my family," Patel said calmly. "My parents came to America in 1970 with nothing but hope and determination. My father worked 3 jobs, as a taxi driver during the day, a security guard at night, and a janitor on weekends. My mother cleaned office buildings and took care of other people's children." His voice remained steady, but there was emotion behind it. They didn't come here for government handouts or special treatment. They came here because they believed in the American dream. The idea that if you work hard and follow the rules, you can build a better life for your children. He looked directly at Leavitt. "My father never took a penny of welfare, never asked for special treatment, never expected America to owe him anything. He just worked and saved and sent me to school with the money he earned with his own hands." The studio was completely silent now. Even Leavitt's supporters were listening intently. "When I was old enough to serve my country," Patel continued, "I didn't hesitate. I became a prosecutor, putting criminals in prison. I worked undercover to catch drug dealers and terrorists. I risked my life in operations that I still can't talk about because they're classified." He paused, his eyes never leaving Leavitt's face. "I've been shot at by terrorists. I've been threatened by drug cartels. I've spent nights in foreign countries where being discovered would have meant death, all to protect American lives. So, when Ms. Leavitt questions my loyalty to America, when she tells me to go back to India, she's not just insulting me. She's insulting every immigrant family that has ever sacrificed for this country. She's insulting every American whose parents came here seeking a better life." Applause began to spread through parts of the audience, but Patel held up his hand. "But I'm not done yet, because the really interesting part isn't my family's story. It's hers." Leavitt's face turned white. She clearly hadn't expected this. Patel opened the folder and pulled out several documents. "You see, Ms. Leavitt loves to talk about being a real American whose family has deep roots in this country. She's built her entire political identity around the idea that she represents authentic American values." He held up the first document. "But according to public records, the Leavitt family immigrated to America in 1892. That's right. Karoline Leavitt is a third-generation immigrant, just like millions of other Americans." The audience began to murmur. This was not what anyone had expected. But here's where it gets really interesting. Patel continued, his voice taking on the tone of a prosecutor, presenting evidence to a jury. "The Leavitt family came here from, wait for it, Canada." He paused for effect. "That's right, folks. The woman who just told me to go back to India is herself the descendant of Canadian immigrants who came to America looking for economic opportunities." The murmuring in the audience grew louder. Some people began to laugh at the irony. "But wait, there's more," Patel said, clearly enjoying himself now. "According to immigration records, Karoline's great-grandfather, Thomas Leavitt, was actually refused entry to the United States twice, before finally being admitted on his 3rd attempt." Leavitt tried to interrupt. "This is ridiculous. You can't compare." "Oh, but I can," Patel cut her off smoothly, "because you see, Thomas Leavitt was rejected because immigration officials were concerned about his ability to support himself in America. He had no money, no job prospects, and no guarantees." He looked directly at the camera. "In other words, Thomas Leavitt was exactly the kind of immigrant that his great-granddaughter now wants to keep out of America." The audience erupted. Some people were cheering, others were laughing, and a few were clearly uncomfortable with this turn of events. Patel wasn't finished. "But here's my favorite part of the Leavitt family story. Thomas Leavitt's immigration petition was actually sponsored by an Indian American businessman who had made his fortune in the textile industry. The studio fell silent again as the full impact of this revelation sank in. "That's right," Patel said, his voice rising now. "Karoline Leavitt's family was only able to come to America because an Indian immigrant vouched for them and helped them get established." He turned to face Leavitt directly. "So when you tell me to go back to India, you're literally telling the descendant of the people who helped your family come to America to leave the country that we both call home." The irony was so perfect, so complete that even some of Leavitt's supporters in the audience began to shake their heads in disbelief. But Patel wasn't done delivering his knockout blow. "Ms. Leavitt," he said, his voice now carrying the full authority of his years in law enforcement. "You want to talk about real Americans? Let me tell you what real Americans do." He stood up, his presence commanding the entire studio. "Real Americans don't judge people by the color of their skin or the country their grandparents came from. Real Americans judge people by their character, their actions, and their service to others." His voice was rising with passion. "Real Americans don't tell other Americans to go back where they came from, especially when their own families came from somewhere else, too." He pointed directly at Leavitt. "Real Americans don't build their careers on dividing people and spreading hate. Real Americans build their careers on bringing people together and serving their country." The audience was on its feet now, many people applauding loudly. Even some of the camera operators were nodding in agreement. "You want to know the difference between us, Ms. Leavitt?" Patel asked, his voice now thundering through the studio. "My family came to America with nothing and gave everything to this country. Your family came to America with nothing and apparently taught their descendants to look down on other people who did the same thing." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I've spent my entire adult life serving America as a prosecutor, as an intelligence officer, as a public servant. You've spent your career serving Donald Trump and your own political ambitions. So before you ever again question anyone's loyalty to America, Patel,